So, the contest, let's talk about this. We have a contest ongoing tonight on the show, and it is a single question that there is indeed a single answer to. Last time on the show, I was talking about mystery traditions, okay? Basically, mystery schools of the ancient world. And we were talking about how these are the place that modern mystery traditions like Freemasonry or Rosicrucianism are derived from. They're actually a much older esoteric tradition from which these modern institutions pull many of their teachings. And I was likening Freemasonry's second degree to an initiatory tradition of the ancient past, particularly in Egypt, what was known as Kemet, long, long ago. And this tradition, the Cometian mystery tradition, would essentially reserve some of its higher order teachings for people that they knew would not abuse them. And they needed to display a fundamental piece of knowledge in order to then be passed on to go into the higher level teachings, because the teachers of this mystery school were fully aware that if someone did not enter some of this higher level knowledge with the right consciousness, okay, that they could enter it with ego. And in doing so, they might take some of that higher level information, pervert it, twist it, and perhaps use it as a weapon against those who were not at that level of knowledge in their own experience in life. And indeed, unfortunately, this is what has happened in the world. That very scenario is what actually occurred. That is what the occult simply is. For people who, again, will hear this word, occult or mystery traditions, and immediately think evil, the word evil is the first thing that comes into your thought process. That is a form of mind control. The actual meaning of the word occult simply means hidden. It is based on the verb in the Latin language, occultare. And I would highly suggest to people to attempt to think of the word occult instead of as a noun, which people immediately think of it as. Think of it as a verb, because that is what it is. Occultare, which is where the word occult comes from, is a verb in Latin, and it simply means to hide, to conceal, or to keep secret. What we're doing on this show, and have been doing for 13 months, is revealing the world of the occult, that which has been hidden from our eyes. And when we truly understand what this body of knowledge is, it may come to surprise some individuals, because what it really is information about ourselves. It is information about how our own psyche functions and operates, what our motivations are, okay? How our thoughts, emotions, and actions create the world that we see around us collectively. That's what the occult teachings are all about. Whether anyone wants to accept that or not is their own business, but that is indeed what the occult is. We are seeing an image that I began to break down last week, and this is from the alchemical tradition, which is very closely related to Freemasonry. Some Rosicrucian schools also will use this image, okay? So this is a old depiction of the pillars, okay? These pillars we saw when we looked at the first degree tracing board of Freemasonry, and pillars play a prominent role in the symbolism of Freemasonry in general. They ultimately represent the masculine and feminine sides of ourselves. Okay, that's what we have to understand about symbols, is that they are used to encode information. Okay, so this image that you're looking at here isn't just a series of symbols and drawings. It's essentially a book. It's a story, okay, that unravels okay, and delves deeply into the psyche, the nature of self, consciousness, etc. I know that may be difficult for people who are unfamiliar with symbolism to accept or to believe at first, but if you follow through the tapestry that I've continued to basically piece together here over the many weeks I've been doing this show, okay, and that's why the podcast section is just a great resource of information for that, and often with many links to documents and to images, related images and related videos. It's a wealth of information in its own right, that one single page. So I highly encourage people to make use of it. This symbolism will begin to make sense if you have the building blocks in hand in order to decode it. Okay, so it is a form of encoded information. Now, ultimately, what the checkered floor there down at the bottom of the image represents is lower consciousness, base consciousness, okay? Like the caller said, the psychologist caller, Chris, said earlier, we basically have a threefold nature, and we have a threefold physical brain. And this is information I've broken down extensively in the past on the show. And again, it's in the podcast archives on my site. We have a reptilian brain, a mammal brain, and a human brain. These are the constructs of the brain. The R complex, or the reptilian complex, is base consciousness. It's our lower level instincts, okay, that drive lower level material world identified behavior. All right, so the fight or flight response is governed by this part of the brain. Simple physical respiration and motor function. All right, fight or flight response is if you're attacked, if you're under direct physical threat. You have to make a choice. Do you want to run and attempt to escape the physical danger, or do you want to stand and fight? Okay, and that's the lowest level of consciousness there is essentially pure concern or identification with the physical matter and physical surroundings, survival only based consciousness, okay, from a fear-minded perspective. So that's what that floor, that checkered floor represents, being as low as you can go. You haven't really begun coming out of animal type qualities, all right? You're still identified with that reptilian brain. Now, the pillars represent the spiritual journey into higher states of consciousness through the integration of the masculine and the feminine aspects within ourself. These are not external qualities, they are internal qualities. So we see there are 4 symbols on these pillars, 2 on each one at the base, 1 at the top of the pillars. And they are the alchemical symbols of earth, air, water, and fire. Earth being at the bottom right-hand side of the image, okay, the inverted triangle, and it is segmented, okay? This is at the bottom of the B pillar. The B stands for Boaz, which is what this pillar is referred to as in Freemasonry, the pillar of Boaz. These are the pillars that were outside of the Temple of Solomon, because the seal of Solomon, or what is known as the Star of David, as the previous caller also mentioned, is the unification, stands for the unification of the spiritual and the material, and the unification of the masculine and the feminine, okay? It is ultimately about the unification of our emotions and our actions. That's ultimately what this symbol represents, okay? So down at the bottom of the B pillar, right, the darker pillar, is the symbol of earth. Now this represents what we basically come into the world, innate qualities, all right? Maybe our physical attributes, maybe the innate talents that we may have and be good at, all right? The circumstances that we're born into, the surroundings, our physical environment, our mental environment, as far as the other people that we are born around, etc. In other words, earth represents our resources and our surroundings. When we go farther along, the top of the pillar of Boaz there, underneath the moon, because this is the lunar or feminine side, okay? These are about innate aspects, all right? The unseen, that which is not carried on the outside, but that which is pretty much dwelling within us, okay? So we employ our emotions in the world. That's one of the main ways that we basically navigate the space that we're in. Our emotions are a guidance system, okay? It's like, I liken it to a compass, okay? We need to have compassion to have a compass for direction in life. That's ultimately what guides our behavior, all right? So at the top of this pillar, representing the higher consciousness, not just what we have as far as our innate talents or what's in our surroundings, but what we truly have as our makeup within ourself. The inverted triangle there up at the top of the pillar on the right is the alchemical symbol of water, okay? And this represents our emotional qualities, okay? The types of emotions that we display. There's the intro music for the break. I'll continue to break down this alchemical symbol of the twin pillars after these messages. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on Oracle Broadcasting. I'm your host, Mark Passio. We'll be right back, folks. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. In these last two segments, I'm just going to jump right back into the breakdown of the symbols. They're listed on What on Earth is Happening on the radio listen page. We're looking at image number 1, the twin pillars, and this is an alchemical depiction of these pillars. We looked at the dark pillar of Boaz. Now let's look at the light pillar of Jachin, marked with the J. This is the solar pillar, and these are the qualities that are pretty readily able to be seen by others. So at the bottom there, we have, so these are more external principles. At the bottom there, we have the alchemical symbol for air. This represents intellectual capacity, which one, by being around, you can probably gauge or assess readily because you would display basically through your behavior and through your words your general intellectual capabilities. So this is also a masculine quality because pure intellect is what is being discussed here. We're not really talking about holistic understanding or wisdom, okay? We're talking about the intellectual capacities, or in other words, left brain capabilities, the capabilities to analyze and to dissect and to see patterns, etc., okay? So the air qualities are on the masculine side, the male pillar, the pillar of Jachin. And this represents a journey out of dark into light, toward light. That's why it's on the light pillar, okay? However, as I've said already on this show, simply knowing something that you've arrived at through a linear process of understanding, through looking at different patterns, through analyzing resources of information, etc., is not the end of the journey. What ultimately needs to be done is that needs to be bridged with the emotional qualities in order to take right action in the world, and also combined with the resources at our disposal. So in other words, the knowledge that you acquire at the base of this pillar, which represents a progression out of the simple internal qualities, maybe feeling or intuition about what is actually going on, then you know it, okay? But it's still at the base of the secondary pillar there of Jachin. It has to be used in the world. It has to be put into effect in order to create something better in the world with that knowledge. So at the top of the pillar of Jachin there on the left, underneath the sun, is the alchemical symbol of fire, the upright triangle. And this is the symbol of fire, which represents action in the world, okay? Willpower to act. So we have the resources at our disposal at the base of the right-hand pillar. We have the emotional qualities that we carry within ourselves, and the intuition, that's the top of the right-hand pillar, the water symbol, okay? The emotional aspects of the individual, the lunar side, okay? This is what we have to work with in our innate qualities and what we have within us as far as our emotional makeup goes. Then on the left-hand side, we have our intellect at the base of the pillar, and then what we actually do with the other three qualities, Okay, so what we actually do with our intellect, combined with our emotional qualities, combined with the resources at our disposal and our talents, that the highest point of this is fire, okay, which is at the top of the secondary pillar, which is what true enlightenment ultimately encompasses, is taking right action in the world. Not just knowing, but knowing and then applying that knowledge in the world. So this entire image, okay, represents coming to a better understanding of our spiritual nature, because this is the generative principle. This is the principle of creation. You see at the bottom there the word inferius in Latin, representing the lower material identified world. But then as you come up to the top and unify the pater, which means father, the sun, and mater, mother, the moon, okay, to create the union of opposites, the synthesis, the chemical wedding as it is known, okay, you have the word superius, which means the higher world, okay, and that is where the gods, there you see all of the gods of astrotheology, the sun, the moon, and the planets there at the top of the image. In other words, the heavenly bodies, the heavenly hosts, so to speak, okay, and then you see two words there at the top. I'm sorry, before I get to that, you also see this circle with the two triangles in it, unifying the divine and the material worlds, okay? And you have the alchemical symbol of Mercury inside of there, the elixir of life, okay? Formed by the mercurial qualities, the divine union, okay? Between the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, between our emotions and our actions. So the words at the top here, okay, on the left and right hand sides in the clouds up top, Aishmayim, right? This simply means the generative formation or the principle of creation. You could look at those words as meaning. This is the way that the physical reality in which we live is brought into manifestation. It is brought into manifestation based upon our behavior, okay? And the unification of the masculine and feminine principles, or in other words, what we know and how we feel, right? So our thoughts and our emotions then give rise or give birth to our behavior in the world, our actions, okay, which is why that's at the top of the left-hand pillar, the masculine pillar. And that creates this synthesis, this union of opposites called the chemical wedding, a lot of times in alchemy, okay? And that is the generative principle. Generative meaning the principle that creates or generates, okay? This is connected with Freemasonry very deeply because the G inside the compasses and square stands for this very principle, the generative principle, okay, as we've talked about already on this show. So this image is a fundamental basis for the pillars of Jachin and Boaz in Freemasonry. And again, this image is used in alchemy and Rosicrucianism as well. So what I wanted to do with the time we have left is simply look at some other themes that show these two pillars, and then look at what's known as Royal Arch Masonry, which is a degree of the York Rite, degrees within the York Rite of Freemasonry, which are about this generative principle and coming to a higher level of consciousness by bridging the sacred masculine with the sacred feminine. Okay, so the emotional qualities of the sacred feminine being united with the active qualities of, the masculine aspects of ourself, our actions. So we need to act in harmony with what we know and feel to be right. Thoughts, emotions, and actions in unison with each other, and there being no contradiction between those three modalities or the expressions of consciousness. Again, that's not consciousness itself. That's something much more all-encompassing. But the way that consciousness expresses here through us in the physical world is through our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. I call it the expressions of consciousness. So what we want to look at is in the Royal Arch tradition, how this synthesis is often depicted as the keystone of the arch. So we're going to look at that coming up. But let's move on to image number 2, the Master's Carpet of Freemasonry. Here we see this same theme repeated once again with the 2 pillars. You have the altar in the middle with the 3 candles, which I have already said in previous shows represent the path of the sun from the eastern horizon to the western horizon, and it makes a trek across the southern portion of the sky. I posted a good visual aid to that in the last podcast. So that's why there is no a light in the north on Freemasonic altars, because it is considered the place that the sun does not pass through. Hence, it is called the place of darkness. Again, this is more basic astrology, but it's astrotheology, because the whole idea is getting to that enlightenment, which is represented by the sun coming together with the moon and giving birth to the all-seeing eye of an awakened consciousness. So again, we see this theme repeated here again. I want to draw your attention to the heart right in the middle of the image. True care, okay? The heart, the center of self, because these pillars represent the self, okay? Below the floor of the house represents the spirit being deadened, okay, and needing to be raised out of its grave. We saw the legend of Hiram Abiff, okay, the Christ consciousness in the Freemasonic tradition, so to speak, all right? This is the spirit that is within us all, the spark of the divine, which needs to be awakened and basically come up in its understanding, in our understanding of true self. That's what the entombed Hiram Abiff represents. Okay, this coffin underneath the floor of the house, the checkered floor, is when Hiram Abiff is dead, or the spirit is dead. The true spiritual nature of ourselves is not properly understood, and therefore it is in its grave. It needs to be raised up out of the dead and be reawoken to new life, a second birth. So we'll continue with this on the other side of the break. For the break, we were continuing to look at some of the symbolism of Freemasonry, particularly the the recurring theme of 2 pillars, and how they are representative of the masculine and feminine side of our psyches and our nature, and they need to be brought into a synthesis, a positive synthesis, by uniting our emotions and our actions. And this is what basically brings our spirit to life. And this Master's Carpet depicts the deadened spirit in the coffin there, and the journey that it must make out of that realm of darkness and the grave to the light of the all-seeing eye, or the Creator. And we see tons of symbolism on this image. We have the moon, the star, and the sun. Okay, we have again the astrotheological cults of the ancient world, the lunar cult, the stellar cult, and the solar cult. We see, of course, we looked at that in the astrotheology section when we talked about them being the foundation of modern religions. We see the all-seeing eye representing the light of the Creator, the light of consciousness, okay? We see the ladder representing our climb, or our journey out of darkness and toward light. We see the symbol of the sun, its path through the year. On the right-hand side, that circle with the 2 lines, the parallel lines, that's representative of the sun and its apparent path during the course of the year, as the Earth revolves around the sun. How it makes a progression between the 2 tropics, an angular progression from 23.5 north to 23.5 south during the course of a solar year. We see the hourglass with the sand running through it, warning us to make good use of our time, because you see the scythe there behind the hourglass representing death's approach, which is one thing we all share in common. It is the grand leveler, as it is known in Freemasonry. It levels the board for all of us, because indeed we are all on a schedule that has an appointment with that fate eventually. No one gets out of here alive, as they say. We see the trivium depicted as the basis for coming out of darkness and starting to ascend the pillars there on the right-hand side, depicted by the Pythagorean the Pythagorean triangle with the squares depicting the Pythagorean formula. So that's representative, of course, of the trivium, the quadrivium, and the five senses, and how we come to learn anything, basically. Phenomenal information to study the trivium, which we will get into in future shows. So what else do we have here of any significance? We have the anchor. That means that we must be anchored in truth, okay? We must have accurate knowledge, and that's why it's on the active pillar to act upon. Okay, so we have to have a firm anchoring in hand of the truth that is taking place around us before we begin to act or climb that left-hand pillar and take action in the world. So this is just another symbol, another way of saying the same thing. It's about the chemical wedding, or the union of opposites, the divine union, it has been called in other traditions, between the principle of action and the principle of the divine feminine, or our emotions, the heart. Okay, I've called it the heart, mind, guts. You know, it's what we know, what we feel, and how we act. These are the chakras that have to be unified. The solar plexus chakra connecting up with the higher chakras of the heart, and then the knowledge chakras of the third eye and the throat, what we know, and being willing to speak the truth, unifying that with the principle of action represented by the solar plexus chakra. So we've covered this all in the past. This is pretty much a kind of like almost a review of some of those concepts, but you're seeing it in symbolic form. Let's move on to image number 3, which is a depiction of an old Royal Arch tracing board. Now, again, as I said, in the modern lodge system, the Royal Arch degrees are part of the York Rite, and they are touched upon in the Scottish Rite. But this image here, again, we see the word Solomon, the combination of the sun and moon, king of Israel, right? Rex Israel means king of Israel. Israel, Isis, Ra, El, okay? Isis, the divine feminine. Ra, the male child. El, the father, okay? We looked at that when we looked at astrotheology. Again, this is for people new to this. There's prerequisite knowledge for some of this, and we've seen some of these word plays and symbols before, so I highly encourage you to make use of the podcast section of my website as a resource. If you get caught up, you'll have a much firmer grasp when we start to talk about this complex symbolism. I know it's, you know, kind of an inappropriate way to pick up on things, but I can't go back and, you know, repeat the same things I've already said on the show over and over and over again. So again, those resources are there. They're free. They're at your disposal. You can go and download them all for free and listen to them all at your convenience. So we saw the 3 builders of the Temple of Solomon, representing the male and female sides of ourselves, the masculine and feminine, the sun and the moon, as being Solomon, Hiram, king of Tyre, and Hiram Abiff, H-A-B. They're representing Hiram Abiff's name. And we see the Royal Arch symbol there on the left, on the other side of the altar from the letters H-A-B. Here we see the 2 pillars once again, okay, representing basically the same thing we've been talking about, the floor, the checkered floor of the house once again, and now the arch coming together on both sides, but the keystone of the arch not being there, okay? Now what this represents, and here's the real key to this, the stone, okay, of the archway represents the pineal gland, but in a state of not being fully activated. When that stone is removed and light pours into the center of the self, toward the heart, right? The center of this image is always the union. So we see these 2 angels with their wing tips combined right in the center of the image. This is the activated heart chakra. Okay, and the light is knowledge coming in, the knowledge of true self coming in and activating the center of self, or the heart chakra. Now, people have a very bad misunderstanding of this, because in biblical terms, the chief cornerstone or keystone, okay, is referred to as Jesus. And when people see the cornerstone of the archways being taken out, they look at this as if it's saying reject the Christ consciousness, okay, or reject the values of Christianity. Nothing could be further from the truth. The stone in the place of the arch, okay, needs to be transmuted to light. That's what the Christ consciousness is actually represented by, the light of the Creator pouring through into man's consciousness, okay? So part of the Royal Arch ritual is to rise, meaning come up in consciousness, wrench forth the keystone, meaning clear the debris from your pineal gland, the all-seeing eye in the center of each one of our heads, okay, that is often calcified. And I've talked about this extensively through the chemical sludge that we often put into our body through what we laughingly call food, which, getting on the healthy foods is a huge part of the awakening process. We need to basically remove that or de-stone it or take away all the debris, okay, that is calcifying it, and then the light pours in because that's the spiritual vision gland. But that's all we have time for tonight on What on Earth is Happening. I highly encourage you to call into the show next Sunday.